The first time anyone heard about Thornhill Asylum, it was just a footnote in a local newspaper, printed on a sweltering October afternoon in 1902. Thornhill Mental Health Institution opens in Waverly County. Nothing unusual. Just another stone structure built atop a remote hill, surrounded by dense woods, far enough away that the nighttime screams of its inmates wouldn't bother anyone. On paper, Thornhill was meant to be a sanctuary, a place of healing. But within the cold halls of that four-story building, something much older and darker seemed to have been constructed alongside the walls. Something that appeared on no blueprint. Something no one dared to name. And though it was officially shut down in 1956, locals swear that even today, when the wind blows from the east, you can hear chains dragging across the third floor. For nearly 50 years, Thornhill Asylum maintained a reputation wrapped in silence and discipline. Its annual reports were terse. Its doctors distant. The patients? Nameless numbers, their faces erased from files that mysteriously vanished after the closure. But everything began to change on a rainy night in 1928, when a newly graduated doctor named Elias Corbin was transferred to the night shift. It was his first week at the asylum and he already felt something was terribly wrong. The smell in the hallways wasn't just mold and disinfectant. There was a heavy metallic odor that clung to the throat like old blood. The lights flickered without explanation, and the clocks never seemed to agree on the hour. But what truly made him question his sanity was the sound he heard coming from the basement. Someone was singing in Latin, but the patients were already locked up. Dr. Corbin reported the incident to his superiors but was advised to not get involved with the traditions of Wing C. Wing C. No map marked its existence. Curious, he began to investigate the records. He discovered hidden folders with names crossed out, charts where the date of death came before the date of admission. There were mentions of an experiment called Project Menad, an alleged attempt to induce controlled possession states for therapeutic purposes. All archived under ethical failure. But the most disturbing part was scribbled in shaky handwriting on the margin of one document. They are not patients. They are offerings. From that moment on, the doctor knew his life was in danger. But escaping wouldn't be so simple. The gates of Thornhill had closed themselves that night. The asylum had been designed by an eccentric architect named Victor Roseland, who never accepted another project after Thornhill. Rumor has it he disappeared on the very day of the asylum's inauguration. Some believe he was swallowed by one of the underground tunnels connecting the main building to the forest. Yes, there were tunnels. 3 known entrances, all sealed with thick concrete, and one showed recent signs of being broken into as if someone, or something, was trying to get out. According to local legends, those tunnels led to an ancient indigenous burial ground, desecrated decades earlier during the building's foundation. And it is precisely at this intersection of historical fact and regional mythology that Thornhill transforms. No longer an asylum but a gateway between worlds. And more unsettling still, some of the patients had not been admitted, they had been summoned. In 1931, a state inspector named Anthony Delroy was sent to Thornhill following anonymous complaints. His report never reached the health department. But his personal journal, discovered decades later in his grandson's attic, revealed passages of restrained terror. In one of them, Delroy described a woman named Bernice Holloway, a patient for over 12 years who claimed to speak to an entity called the Glass Lady. She said the lady lived in the mirror in room 304, and that she demanded blood at every new moon. Skeptical, Delroy went to the room. In the mirror, only his reflection. But as he turned to leave, he noticed the image was still staring, with a smile he hadn't made. Before he could react, the mirror cracked on its own. 7 days later, Delroy vanished from official records. His wife received a death certificate signed by a doctor who never existed. The cameras installed in 1944 for security monitoring recorded only noises. Muffled sounds, low-frequency humming, and occasionally children's laughter. The strange part? There were no children in the asylum. None. Not among patients nor staff. And yet, children's voices appeared in nearly every recording. A nurse named Meredith once reported that, every night at 3:13 a.m., someone knocked 3 times on the infirmary door. When she opened it, she found a rag doll sitting alone in the chair. Always the same doll. Always with eyes painted red. When she finally decided to burn it, Meredith was found the next morning without her eyes, hands covering her face, as if trying to keep something out. The doll had reappeared on the shelf. There was an unspoken rule among the older staff. Never say Thornhill's name out loud outside the asylum. They believed the name itself carried a frequency that could awaken the structure. Thornhill to them was not a building. was a living being. And for every patient who vanished, a new room appeared. Reports spoke of stairways leading to places not on any blueprint, doors that weren't there the day before, and hallways that ended in pulsating flesh-like walls, as if the building itself was digesting the patients. Those who noticed these architectural changes disappeared within 48 hours. And those who stayed, forgot. As if memory itself was being rewritten in real time. What haunts Thornhill to this day isn't just the disappearances or the erased files. It's the silence. A silence so deep it feels heavy. Illegal visitors who dared to explore after the closure reported the same sensation. An auditory vacuum where even their own footsteps made no sound. And then, out of nowhere, the feeling of breath behind the neck. A whisper that cannot be reproduced. A name, spoken in pain. And always the same name, Elias. Yes, the young doctor. The one who heard the singing in the basement. He never left the asylum. No discharge record. No body found. Only a note taped to the door of the inner chapel reading, "I came to heal the mind, and lost my soul." But the story doesn't end here. There is much more hidden in Thornhill's sealed basements. There are tapes. There are letters. There are screams still caught in the air ducts. And now that you've heard the first whisper from this place, the only question is, would you dare continue? It was as if it had never existed. No newly hired staff member was ever informed of the existence of Ward C. On the maps distributed during training, the numbering skipped directly from Ward B to Ward D, as if the space between them were simply a printing error. But among the stuffy corridors and doors that creaked on their own, the legend of Ward C was whispered by the older employees with an uncomfortable reverence, like one speaks of something that cannot be touched. Those who dared say the name aloud never lasted long at Thornhill. Sudden transfers, psychotic breaks, resignations without notice. It was as if the very name carried a curse, as if the mere mention of it opened cracks in the fabric of reality. And it was precisely that wing, absent from all official records, that Dr. Elias Corbin decided to investigate. Not out of curiosity, but because, on the third night of his stay at the asylum, he awoke to find his bedroom door slightly ajar, and wet footprints leading directly toward it. The entrance to Ward C wasn't on the ground floor like the others. One had to descend a dim staircase at the end of the east corridor, a space that, until then, Elias had believed was under renovation. But when he pushed open the rusted door, marked with a strange symbol resembling a spiral crossed with bones, he knew he had gone too far. The air inside was different. Far too warm for a basement. The lamps flickered as if something was pulsing behind the darkness, and the walls were covered in symbols scratched with fingernails. But that wasn't what made him stop. What paralyzed Elias was the sound, or rather, the complete absence of it. No music. No voices. No whispers. No footsteps. As if Ward C existed outside of time, outside of physics, outside of reality. In the first few minutes, Elias believed he was alone. But turning into a side hallway, he saw a figure sitting on the floor, completely still, facing the wall. A patient. Or at least it seemed like one. Torn hospital clothes, disheveled hair, eyes staring at nothing. When Elias approached and called for help, the figure slowly turned its head toward him, and smiled. But not with the mouth. The smile came from the eyes, a grotesque contraction of facial muscles, as if the body were trying to imitate an emotion it had never truly felt. And then it whispered in a low metallic voice, "She's awake." Elias stepped back, tripped over something and fell. When he turned around, he saw dozens of circular marks engraved into the floor, as if something had been dragged there, repeatedly. And above him, a broken camera with a handwritten label, "Do not record this area." Later, when he reported what he'd seen, Elias was ignored. They told him Ward C didn't exist, that he had probably confused it with the storage room in Block D. But the next night he found a single folded piece of paper slipped under his door, no sender. Inside was a black and white photograph. It showed 3 nurses standing in front of a steel door marked with the same spiral symbol he'd seen in Ward C. Behind them, barely visible through a tiny window, a shadowy human figure. The detail? The photo was dated 1904. And one of the nurses was identical to the asylum's current supervisor, who claimed to be only 45 years old. Determined to understand what Ward C truly was, Elias began interviewing patients who had suffered severe episodes. Many couldn't form complete sentences. Others hid under their beds when hearing the word stairs. But one of them, Arthur Bell, an ex-professor of quantum physics, institutionalized after being found naked on a university rooftop, said this: "They don't know. They think they're treating minds. But Ward C treats portals. Parallel realities condensed by pain. Thornhill is a point of intersection. And Ward C is where the fabric tears. Before Elias could ask more, Arthur suffered a violent seizure and was transferred to total isolation. No one ever saw him again. That same day, Elias broke into the medical records room hidden behind the third-floor chapel. There, among dusty folders and redacted files, he found an old journal, coverless with yellowed pages. It was the diary of the first director of Thornhill, Dr. Marius Thornhill, founder and namesake of the asylum. In his notes, he described recurring dreams of a faceless woman seated in a wheelchair, reciting numbers in Latin. Always the same, trace septem tridicem. 3, 7, 13. He believed they were access codes to hidden rooms. In an entry dated 1903 he wrote, "Ward C has been opened. Not by me. Not by us. But by her. She asked for space. We gave it. Now, we can no longer close it." From that point on, the behavior of the building itself began to change. Lights failed more frequently. Patients began to repeat the same words endlessly, awake, awake, awake. Nurses reported time loss, entering a hallway and upon exiting hours had passed. And at the center of it all, Ward C. Night after night, Elias grew more certain. Thornhill was not an asylum for the mentally ill. It was a kind of antenna. A cell. An altar. And Ward C was the point where the cell opened. Where something ancient, hungry, and intelligent communicated with the mentally fragile. Elias's investigation led him to even more disturbing findings. Records of patients who had never been officially admitted, but whose signatures appeared on clinical forms. One of them was a boy named David Penn, admitted at age 8 after speaking with the men in the walls for 3 consecutive days. No photo. No family history. Only a handwritten note, "Do not allow near mirrors." The boy disappeared 3 weeks later. Since then, the room where he had slept, Ward C, bed 7, has never been able to be locked. The door rejects every lock. Every time it is secured, the lock melts overnight. On the night of March 13, 1929, Elias was seen for the last time. Internal cameras captured him entering the east corridor with a flashlight and a folder in hand. He was never recorded exiting. However, at exactly 3:13 a.m., the same time Meredith had reported knocking in the previous chapter, the fire alarm activated on its own. Security arrived to find Ward C open, empty, and in the center of room 7, a shattered mirror. On the floor, a single phrase written in blood, "She showed me the other side." Since then, Ward C has been officially sealed. But those who know Thornhill insist it never truly ceased to exist. Some nights, the door reappears. No matter how many times it's welded shut, it appears again in different locations. Sometimes in the cafeteria, sometimes behind the laundry, sometimes inside another room. Always marked with the spiral crossed symbol. And always, with a faint sound of breathing coming from inside. In the next chapter, we will uncover the lost records of director Marius Thornhill, and how the founder of the asylum gradually lost his mind while writing what appears to be a summoning manual disguised as a treatment protocol. Prepare yourself for the darkest part of this story, because the construction of the asylum may have been inspired by something that was never human. Most people believed Thornhill Asylum was founded with good intentions. And at first glance, everything pointed to that. The building was erected in 1901 by Marius Thornhill, a renowned British doctor who had relocated to New England after losing his wife in a mysterious fire in London. Following her death, Marius allegedly devoted himself to the study of mental illness, publishing articles on altered states of consciousness and interdimensional communication through extreme suffering, concepts dismissed by the scientific community at the time, but which would later form the basis for the asylum's dark practices. What almost no one knows is that Dr. Thornhill kept a secret journal, a set of handwritten records that were never published, but survived hidden inside a hollow beam in the asylum's library. These writings, now known as the Lost Records, were not medical reports. They were confessions. A deeper and deeper descent into the madness of a man who believed he was healing souls, but who, over time, opened doors that should never have been touched. The first volume of the records begins methodically. Clinical analyses, observations on schizophrenic patients, notes on catatonic behavior. But starting on page 49, something shifts. The handwriting changes, shakier, as if the author was no longer in full control of the pen. And then, instead of patient names, Latin words appear. Atri umbri, domus inversa, corda mentis. Uncertain translations, possibly meaning dark shadows, inverted house, mind cord. The emerging theory from these pages is terrifying. Marius believed that certain mental breakdowns were not illnesses, but enhanced perceptions, briefly opened windows into other planes of existence. And more disturbingly, he believed that it was possible to force that window open, through pain, isolation, and sensory deprivation. In one of the most disturbing passages, Marius describes the treatment of a patient named Elijah Broom, an 11-year-old orphan who suffered from extreme night terrors. Instead of sedatives, the director proposed confinement in a mirrored room for 3 consecutive days, under the premise that the child needed to recognize his reflection in darkness. At the end of the experiment, Elijah was found kneeling, repeating the phrase, "She lives in the light no one sees." He lost the ability to speak permanently and died 3 weeks later of cardiac arrest. But Marius seemed unaffected. In his journal he wrote, "First confirmed response. The veil is thinner than we assumed." In the following volumes, there are recurring mentions of a figure called the Reversed Lady, an entity Marius believed resided in the spaces between thoughts. He wrote as if he spoke with her every night. His words alternated between devotion and terror. "She shows me what is to come but never smiles. She teaches me to count backwards. Always backwards." Some entries read like mantras, others like rituals. One particular sequence of numbers appears in every final page, 7-3-13-1-0. Later researchers would discover that these were the room numbers of the patients who vanished without a trace in 1912. All of them had been housed in the same corridor, Ward C. But the most enigmatic document of all is a letter dated October 17, 1906, written by Marius and never sent. Addressed to someone called the Council of Vigilance, the content suggests that the asylum was part of a much larger network. Institutions designed to monitor points of instability between realities. Marius described the asylum as a rusted axis between the visible world and the unborn one. And he made an urgent request: more patients with a family history of mediumship. The letter ends with an encrypted phrase repeated 3 times. It is not madness if everyone hears the same whisper. Over time, Marius himself began to show signs of mental deterioration. Medical records reveal that in the 2 years leading up to his disappearance, he refused to leave his office after sunset, kept all mirrors covered with black cloth, and held conversations with locked doors. One night, according to a nurse's account, he entered one of the basement tunnels, and was never seen again. The only thing left behind was his stethoscope, hanging on the doorknob of room 3C, and a final note on his desk. "She asked for silence. And I gave her silence." What the records reveal is that the madness within Thornhill Asylum was not an accident. It was the method. Insanity was the chosen path to access what Marius called the inverted truth. His methods didn't cure anyone. On the contrary, they fed something living at the center of the foundation. An invisible, ravenous core that grew stronger with each shattered mind. Thornhill wasn't a hospital. It was a continuous architectural ritual, designed to keep that entity awake, contained but never truly dormant. And each time a patient was lost, a new corridor appeared. A new room. A new mirror. Over the years, other attempts to study the records were mysteriously interrupted. In 1971, a team of psychic archaeologists from the University of Vermont gained partial access to the documents. But 2 researchers went insane within days. A third vanished while typing the report. His computer displayed only one sentence repeated endlessly: "She knows we're reading." Since then, the records have been sealed in a vault under the custody of the local diocese, under constant surveillance. But digital copies began to circulate on the deep web under the title, "Manual from the Other Side." The most chilling discovery came on one of the last pages, a note in modern handwriting, dated 1996. It simply reads, "She is still alive, but sleeping. And the asylum still breathes." This raises a troubling question. If the asylum was closed in 1956, who wrote that note 40 years later? And why? Elias Corbin, the doctor from the previous chapter, had copied fragments of these records before his disappearance. One of those copies was found sewn into the lining of his coat, discovered hanging at the entrance of room 304, the one with the shattered mirror. The most disturbing part? The copied fragments described how to open a permanent rift between worlds, using a mirror, blood, and a true name. A name that must never be spoken aloud. And below that, in trembling handwriting, "Do not say Elias. Never say Elias." The chapter ends with a question that refuses to be silenced. What if Marius Thornhill didn't disappear, but crossed over? Is he still there? Watching? Waiting? Maybe he was the first. Maybe he was the only one. Or maybe He was never human to begin with. In the next chapter, we'll descend into the secret construction of the tunnels beneath the asylum, exploring their hidden paths, unknown symbols, and the reason each one leads to a place where no one ever returns. Little was ever said about the tunnels beneath Thornhill Asylum. There were no mentions of them in the official blueprints. No maps, no public records. But the oldest workers knew. They whispered among themselves like people guarding a secret they would rather forget. They said the building had been erected over a network of passages far older than the asylum itself. Tunnels carved by hands that left no names, only marks etched into the stone and symbols painted on the walls that no one could translate. There were 3 known entrances, all sealed. And yet, something, or someone, kept forging a path through them, always from the inside out. These were not escape routes. They were entry points. The first documented report of these underground passages dates back to 1902, a year after the asylum opened. A maintenance worker named Richard Kuhn vanished while conducting repairs on the main pipeline in the basement. 3 days later, his body was found completely naked, facing a wall, fingernails ripped out, and a message carved into his skin with a sharp object. One must not walk where light has not been invited. The official report listed accidental death by exposure, but his supervisor, who resigned immediately afterward, gave an informal statement. Kuhn didn't die from the cold. He died from something he saw. After that incident, the asylum's basement came to be known among staff as Level 0. Access was strictly forbidden. Yet in the years that followed, the reports multiplied. Creaks in the middle of the night. Voices coming from the drains. Tools disappearing and reappearing bent as if chewed. Even more disturbing, every time a new wing was built above ground, a new tunnel seemed to emerge below, as if the building itself was growing downward, sinking its roots into something ancient that had long been buried. When asked about this at a medical conference in 1909, Director Marius Thornhill simply replied, "Every house needs a foundation. And every foundation requires sacrifice." Elias Corbin, during his short and unsettling time at Thornhill, noted in his journal that the tunnels were the key to understanding the asylum's true purpose. According to him, there was a circular structure at the heart of the passages, informally referred to by the inmates as the cradle. A raw stone chamber, windowless, with 7 entrances, 6 always locked, 1 always open. And in the center of the room, a well. Too shallow to be useful, too deep to ignore. The walls around it were covered in inscriptions that seemed to shift under certain lights. One nurse reported that after staring too long, she began to see the symbols repeating her own name. When dismissed due to emotional instability, she could only repeat one phrase. "The well wants to remember." No one could explain how these underground structures had been built. The concrete in the walls was much older than the rest of the building. Specialists who visited the site in the 1950s believed the stones had not been placed. They had been cast directly into the earth, as if something very hot had melted the surrounding ground, molding the corridors with surgical precision. And yet, some walls radiated warmth, even without any nearby electrical pipes. As if the place was still active, as if it were alive. One of the greatest mysteries of these tunnels were the so-called blind portals. Openings that led nowhere but smooth, featureless walls. Still, several patients and staff members reported feeling cold wind emanating from them, along with voices that sounded like languages no one could identify. A night guard named Samuel Dorn vanished in front of one of these portals while filming the area with a handheld camera. The video, found lying next to his still-lit flashlight, shows the final seconds of his life. A burst of blinding light and a voice whispering something that, when reversed, says, "He was the wrong key." Samuel was never found. Over the decades, every attempt to seal the tunnels failed. Concrete cracked. Doors splintered on their own. In 1934, a crew hired to cement the entrances suffered a collective breakdown. They began singing in unison, a song without words, without rhythm, and then entered the tunnel one by one. None returned. The construction report was filed under structural disaster, but one eyewitness swore that before they entered, the workers said, "The lady is calling us home." In Marius Thornhill's secret records, revealed in the previous chapter, there are detailed sketches of the tunnels. Notably, a circular map with red annotations suggesting that the corridors formed a specific symbol, a ritual sigil used in ancient ceremonies to summon non-human entities. The suspicion that the asylum was intentionally built over this sigil changes everything. Thornhill wasn't meant to heal. It was meant to invoke. And the tunnels were the wiring of the ritual. But there's something even more disturbing. In one of the oldest tunnels, sealed in 1915 after the disappearance of 4 nurses, underground archaeologists discovered traces of a structure predating the asylum, a crypt with Mayan inscriptions indicating the presence of cults devoted to the goddess Ixtab, an entity linked to madness and collective suicide. The crypt contained a stone statue with red quartz eyes, arms outstretched as if to receive offerings. In front of it, 4 marks on the floor with traces of dried human blood. Analysis confirmed, O-negative, female, matching the age range of the missing nurses. And carved into the statue's chest in Latin. Vocatus ac non vocatus, Deus aderit. Called or not called, the god will be present. Authorities, upon learning of this, sealed the entrance with steel plates and motion sensors. Yet to this day, alarms trigger at random, even with no human presence. In 2017, one thermal sensor recorded something impossible. 5 human-shaped figures standing inside the crypt, staring directly at the camera. The most haunting detail, however, is that all tunnels converge at a single point, a descending staircase that doesn't appear on any blueprint. It does not lead to the basement, nor to level 0. It goes below that. Those who glimpsed it said that as one descends, time seems to slow down. Sound distorts. Heartbeats become sluggish. One rogue explorer, live streaming his descent, suddenly stopped speaking and began to whisper a single phrase. "It's coming, and we can't go back up with it." The feed cut out seconds later. His body was never found. But the staircase? Still there. Still waiting. At the end of this chapter, one inevitable question remains. If the building was designed as an architectural ritual, and the tunnels were conduits for whatever still sleeps below, then who or what truly dwells within Thornhill to this day? Next, we uncover the origin of the mirror in room 304, the asylum's most feared object, and how it became a gateway for entities with no reflection, but who know exactly how to imitate the human voice. Prepare yourself to face what no one dares to look at. There are objects that carry more than just reflections. They carry presences, fragments of something that doesn't belong to this side of reality. At Thornhill, there were many such objects. Clocks that ticked backward, dolls that returned to their original place even after being burned, crucifixes found upside down inside the walls. But none inspired more terror than the mirror in room 304. It was a large mirror with a dark wooden frame carved in spiral patterns, hanging in an isolated room on the 3rd floor, where patients in complete mutism were left for days. A silent room. No bed. No books. No windows. Only a chair, and the mirror. They said it was brought from Vienna in the late 19th century, recovered from the basement of a mansion destroyed by fire. The mirror was the only object to survive intact. But the strangest part, no one knew who ordered it. There were no payment records. No authorization for installation. It simply appeared, already hanging on the wall of room 304 with a Latin plaque below. Videbis quatius, you will see what you are. And from that moment on, no one who spent more than an hour in that room ever came out the same. The first documented case was in 1906, when a patient named Adelaide Moore, who suffered from dissociative amnesia, spent 3 nights in the room as part of a gradual exposure therapy. The goal was to confront her with her reflection until she recognized herself. The next morning, Adelaide was found kneeling, hands over her eyes, face turned to the corner. When nurses tried to move her, she screamed so loudly it ruptured the eardrums of one of them. Later, she wrote on the wall in her own blood, "She smiled before I could." Adelaide died of cardiac arrest a few days later. And the mirror no longer reflected the chair. In the years that followed, more patients were placed in room 304. Some left in silence, with no memory of the experience. Others became violent, claiming the reflection watched them differently. There were reports of the mirror fogging up from the inside, as if someone was breathing on the other side. One staff member said he saw his reflection blink, even though he had his back turned to the mirror. And perhaps most disturbing, multiple patients claimed the mirror called them by their true names, names never recorded anywhere. Before disappearing, Elias Corbin believed the mirror was more than a reflective surface. It was a membrane. A point of contact between diverging realities, weakened by rituals conducted during the asylum's foundation. He theorized the frame was infused with sacred charcoal, mixed with human blood and resin from trees used in Egyptian funerary rites. This could explain in part its resistance to cracks, shattering, and temperature shifts. But there was more. A hidden pattern carved behind the wood, only visible under ultraviolet light. A smiling face, but with hollow eyes. In the 1940s, the mirror was placed under constant surveillance by a security camera. Though analog, the footage appeared distorted, showing figures moving behind the reflection, even when the room was empty. In 1946, one video captured the reflection of a child walking inside the room, while the room was officially unoccupied. When investigators tried to rewind the tape, it played only static and a low-frequency audio that, when sped up, revealed the phrase, "She sees you, even when you don't look." But the most terrifying event occurred in 1952, when the mirror shattered on its own for the first time. No impact. No wind. The room was sealed. Yet the surface cracked from the center outward, forming a web-like pattern. The sound was not of breaking glass. It was a scream accidentally captured by a recorder left in the room. The scream sounded like multiple voices at once. A week later, the janitor responsible for cleaning was found dead, his face completely smooth, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. The autopsy was inconclusive, and the glass recomposed itself 3 days later. Paranormal investigators suggested the mirror in room 304 functioned as a black mirror, an artifact used in necromantic rituals and communication with extra-dimensional entities. But unlike ordinary mirrors, it didn't reflect what stood in front of it. It revealed what lurks behind the mind, deep in the forgotten corners of the subconscious. That's why it drove people mad. It didn't reflect the face. It reflected the deepest fear of whoever looked into it. In one entry of Marius Thornhill's diary, there's a chilling account of the mirror. He wrote that after 7 consecutive nights observing it by candlelight, he began to see images that could not have come from memory. Fields beneath a red sky. Limbless creatures crawling in silence. Stone towers with black voids where doors should be. And at the center of it all, a veiled woman, one hand resting on the mirror's frame as if trying to cross over. Marius ends the entry writing, "She does not belong to creation. She is what remains of what came before it." There's another often overlooked detail. The mirror in room 304 doesn't reflect during the day. Only at night, between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m., does it begin to function normally. Before and after that, its surface remains foggy as if covered in mist. And during that window the reflection is accurate, until it lags. Half a second. A blink that's out of sync. A gesture that happens in the mirror before it happens in reality. As if someone was imitating the observer, not the other way around. In 2004, decades after the asylum's closure, a group of urban explorers broke into the building to film a documentary. When they found room 304, they laughed at the legends and decided to film in front of the mirror. 2 days later, one of them vanished. Another lost the ability to recognize faces, including his own. The video was removed from the internet, but those who saw it swear. At the final moment, the cameraman turns to face the lens. But the reflection in the mirror keeps staring ahead. Unblinking, unspeaking, just watching. Today, the mirror is still there. Some say it's cracked again, others claim it was removed and buried in a secret location. But the reports continue. Tourists visiting the region swear they hear knocking from inside the abandoned building, always at the same hour. And the most chilling detail. An anonymous letter sent to the local library simply read, "The mirror is not an object. It's a prison. And now it's hungry." Next, the origin of the reversed lady. The entity that manifests in multiple forms within Thornhill. And why every hallway, tunnel, and mirror seems to point back to her. Before Thornhill had a name, before its walls were raised, and its corridors haunted the nightmares of all who walked them, she was already there. No one knows exactly where she came from. There are no historical records, no ecclesiastical documents that speak of her directly. But between the manic scribbles in patients' journals, the forgotten carvings in the tunnel stones, and the childlike drawings left on the walls, her name appears, not written but whispered. The reversed lady. She doesn't walk forward. She doesn't speak audibly. She doesn't move like the living. And yet, she is everywhere inside the asylum. Present in the mirror. In the voice that travels the hallways. In the delayed reflection. In the sound that echoes beneath the stairs. She was seen. She was felt. And for many, she was the last face they saw before death. The most accepted theory among the few researchers brave enough to dig deep into the Thornhill case is that the reversed lady is not a ghost in the traditional sense. She is not someone's soul. Not the spirit of the dead. She is something that predates identity itself. A living manifestation of a concept. The reversal of the real. To understand her, one must forget time as we know it. Because she doesn't move from past to future. She lives backward from the end toward the origin. And everything she touches begins to unravel. In reverse. People begin to speak languages they never learned. Blood flows back into the skin. Recent memories vanish, while ancient traumas become absurdly vivid. She doesn't kill. She unmakes. One of the earliest reports of direct contact with the reversed lady dates back to 1911, when a patient named Jonah Weather, institutionalized for obsessive disorders, began compulsively drawing a veiled woman with her feet turned backwards. He claimed she taught him how to walk back home. After 72 hours without sleep, Jonah was found in the fetal position, with his mouth full of human hair and blood streaming from both eyes. His final written message was a single sentence: "She whispers where memory ends." After his death, his room was sealed off as other patients began hearing whispers behind the walls, feminine voices calling out names they had never told anyone. Marius Thornhill, in his secret records, referred to her as the inhabitant of the mirrored center. According to him, during deep sensory deprivation experiments conducted on select patients, female voices would emerge from the silence, always with instructions to go back, forget, open what was sealed. In one extreme case, a comatose patient was heard murmuring a precise string of coordinates, which led directly to the sealed tunnel beneath the asylum's dining hall. According to local lore, that same tunnel is where Marius Thornhill vanished for the last time. Some say she took him. Others say he offered himself, as a key, as a sacrifice, as a door. By the 1930s, nighttime psychotic episodes increased so drastically that nurses began using a coded emergency phrase: "Black lady on the 3rd floor." Every time those words were spoken, it meant a patient had entered a full regression episode after staring too long at one of the windows in corridor 3B. They all described the same scene: a woman standing outside the window in the rain, staring in. Even when it wasn't raining. Even when they were on the 4th floor. The most disturbing part? The window she appeared in belonged to a room with no outside access, facing only a stone wall. There was no way anyone could have stood there. Medical reports from Thornhill, carefully hidden for decades, show that many patients who mentioned the reversed lady shared a common set of symptoms. Inverted speech, some began to speak backwards involuntarily. Loss of pupillary reflex. Time disorientation. A phenomenon called reverse echo, in which their words were heard before they were spoken. One doctor who examined these cases wrote in a confidential note, "We are dealing with a vector of fragmented temporality. This entity, if I can call it that, corrupts the flow of cause and effect. Her goal is not destruction, but disassembly." In his final investigations, Elias Corbin discovered inside a wall what appeared to be a mask carved from stone, with perfectly symmetrical yet inverted feminine features. The left side was the perfect mirror of the right, as if meant to be viewed from the inside only. According to Corbin's notes, the mask was the central artifact in a ritual known as invertio mentis, used to summon beings from outside the linear boundaries of reality. Through it, the reversed lady didn't just enter this world. She rewrote it. Starting in 1950, sightings of the reversed lady increased. Patients would leave messages on the walls in charcoal. "She comes when you remember what you tried to forget." Others locked themselves in bathrooms, fearing mirrors, glass, even puddles of water. One patient gouged out his own eyes and wrote with blood, "She cannot see me if I cannot see her." When questioned, he repeated, "If you see me first, there is still time. If she sees you first, it's already too late." Curiously, it wasn't just patients who broke down. Doctors, nurses, even visitors began exhibiting similar symptoms. A chaplain sent by the local diocese went insane after just one night in vigil at the asylum. His final writings read, "She wears words that do not exist. She speaks with the end of the tongue. She shows what hasn't yet happened. And worst of all, she smiles like my mother." The most disturbing theory emerged in 1986, when archaeologists exploring the area discovered, beneath the asylum's foundations, the ruins of a pagan temple bearing inscriptions identical to those found in the tunnels. The most repeated symbol depicted a woman with open arms, an inverted head and eyes where her mouth should be. Beside it, the inscription, Mater Inversa, Finum Incipit, the inverted mother. The end begins. It is now suggested that the land where Thornhill was built has long been a spiritual intersection, a place where the linear nature of reality was already fragile. And the reversed lady is either its guardian, or its prison, the vessel, or the lock, of whatever existed before all this became real. If that's true, then Thornhill isn't an asylum. It's a seal. And every broken reflection, every midnight scream, every fractured mind, is a crack in that seal. So now the question is no longer, who is the reversed lady? But rather, what happens when she stops walking backwards, and finally begins to walk forward? Next chapter. The final events that led to the official closure of Thornhill Asylum in 1956. and why the authorities have never spoken publicly about it again. Few dates in the history of Waverly were as eerily silent as June 12, 1956. There were no sirens, no alarms, not a single line in the newspapers. And yet, at 4:17 a.m., every resident living within a 10-kilometer radius of Thornhill Asylum woke up with the same sensation: the total absence of sound. No birds, no wind, not even the hum of electricity. A vacuum. A silence so dense it seemed to press against the ears, suffocate the chest, disorient the very concept of time. And then, Thornhill stopped. The lights went out. The doors locked themselves. The building, they say, used to breathe. But that day, it held its breath. It all began 36 hours earlier when 3 patients, with no history of contact with each other, began showing the exact same symptoms. Eyes fixed on the ceiling, breathing reversed in rhythm, and the incessant repetition of a single phrase in different languages. Doctors tried sedating them without success. The heartbeats of all 3 entered perfect synchronization. And at midnight that night, the doors of Wing C, sealed for over a decade, opened on their own. No key, no force, no break-in. They just opened, as if someone inside had finally stepped out. Accounts from the few surviving witnesses, traumatized and scarce, speak of impossible phenomena. Clocks that all stopped simultaneously, medical machines displaying negative numbers, shadows with no bodies to cast them, and screams echoing from underground, despite there being no accessible tunnels. A nurse named Bradley Owens, who fled the facility and never returned, said in a covert interview, "It wasn't a fire. It wasn't a riot. It was like the building itself decided to shut down." At 2:45 a.m., every window on the 3rd floor shattered at once. Internal security cameras captured the last known video of Thornhill in operation. A vacant corridor, 3B, flickering lights, and suddenly all the mirrors breaking at once. No touch, no wind, just shattering, as if something on the other side had broken free. A nurse, in shock, wrote with lipstick on the wall of room 304. She crossed over, and she brought silence with her. In the minutes that followed, all monitoring systems failed. Generators shut down simultaneously. And the patients, every single one of them, entered a state of total paralysis. Some sitting, some lying down, eyes open, pupils dilated, breathing frozen. No brain activity, no detectable heartbeats, but also no signs of death. It was as if time inside Thornhill had been paused. At exactly 4:17 a.m., the moment when the silence reached its maximum density, something happened. No one can say what, but everyone in the vicinity felt an instinctive urge to look north. One woman claimed to see the sky split open, as if a crack had formed among the stars. A local pastor said his crucifix melted, without heat. A 6-year-old child drew the floor plan of the asylum in her notebook, without ever having been there. And all the witnesses said that for just a second they heard breathing, coming from the ground. When authorities finally entered the building, 48 hours later, wearing full containment suits, they found the impossible. The building was intact. No power. All patients and staff gone. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just empty rooms. Beds perfectly made. And a single message written in charcoal on the wall of the central room. The house has completed its cycle. The blood was enough. Now the veil no longer needs a mirror. The official investigation labeled it an emergency evacuation due to neurobiological contamination, though no chemical residues were found. No autopsies were conducted. No official reports were ever released. But in partially declassified files from the state government, there is a cryptic notation. Closed. Intervention by Federal Esoteric Unit. Level 7 symbolic contamination. Do not reopen. Do not reference publicly. File under Thornhill phenomenon. The building was sealed with concrete and reinforced steel. But it was never demolished. What? Some theories claim that destroying the structure could release what remains inside. Others argue that Thornhill is no longer in our space, that it has been spiritually and structurally swallowed by something that grew from within. A fissure. An opening. An echo. And so they chose to leave the ruins untouched, like a sealed tomb. In the years that followed, locals began reporting dreams about the building. Recurring dreams. People who had never heard of the asylum began drawing it. Children repeated the names of missing patients. A woman in a 10-year coma suddenly awoke screaming. She walked forward. And the most chilling report of all. In 1999, motion sensors secretly installed by the government detected activity on the 3rd floor. Footsteps. Heartbeats, voices, but no thermal signatures. What happened in 1956 was more than the closure of an institution. It was a ritual silencing, a clean break in the stream of information, a desperate attempt to contain something that does not belong in this world. But maybe it was already too late, because Thornhill didn't die. It just withdrew, and according to more recent reports, is trying to breathe again. If you'd like, I can continue writing the next chapter or help you turn all of this into a full documentary script with intros, outros, visuals, sound cues, and prompts. Would you like to proceed with that? What remained of Thornhill was never demolished. Never. The building still stands, nestled among the fog-covered hills of Waverley, sealed by concrete, steel, and silence. To the maps, it's a contaminated zone. To the locals, it's a hole where sound doesn't enter. A space where time behaves like a wounded animal, oscillating between apathy and rage. For nearly 7 decades, no one dared to enter. But in 2023, that rule was broken. A group of 5 people, made up of urban explorers and 2 retired federal agents, infiltrated the restricted zone with one specific goal: reach room 304, and find out if the reverse lady was still there. They wanted answers, but they ended up awakening something even time itself tried to forget. The group called themselves Project Return. Led by Victor Malden, a former agent of the Federal Esoteric Unit, the group had spent 10 years gathering hidden documents, unofficial maps, and secret files recovered from deleted government servers. According to their research, there was a structural flaw in the northern seal of the building, where the foundation had started to give way due to soil erosion. That would be their entry point. They carried thermal cameras, motion sensors, infrared flashlights, high-frequency audio recorders, and something else. A portable mirror with a spiraled frame, an exact replica of the one in room 304. The intention? Trigger a manifestation. Capture proof. Get out. They believed they were ready. But no one is ever ready to be seen by something that has no eyes. The video logs lasted 38 minutes. After that, static. The first 10 minutes show the group making their way through what remained of the East Wing. The asylum looked frozen in time. Chairs overturned. Rusty medical instruments. A stethoscope lying on the floor. At minute 12, while passing the second-floor hallway, the audio picks up a sound. Not footsteps. Not voices. But breathing. Not human. A guttural rhythmic sound. As if the building itself was breathing through the cracks in its walls. The group freezes. The camera shakes. Someone whispers, "She knows we're inside." At minute 19, they find room 304. The door, once sealed with steel, was now unlocked. No sign of forced entry. Just a handprint on the inside. They enter. The old mirror is there, hung clean, gleaming through the dust. But something's wrong. It reflects the group before they move. The footage captures the moment they all realize it. The reflection smiles first. One of the explorers begins to tremble. She whispers, "She's already inside me." Then collapses. No fall. No scream. Just goes out. Like a candle suffocated in silence. From that point, the footage distorts. The audio begins to play voices that don't belong to anyone in the group. Children's voices. Accents unknown. One of them says, "You didn't come to see. You came to be seen." At minute 26, the camera captures the door closing by itself. Then a sharp sound, glass shattering. But not the old mirror. The portable one they brought. It breaks into 3 shards. And in the shards, something moves. Something veiled. Something whispering from within the light. At minute 31, the recording fails. The image freezes. The audio continues for another 7 minutes. Indecipherable noises, pulsing like a heartbeat, but in reverse. Then, silence. Victor Malden was never seen again. 2 bodies were found days later near the edge of the forest. No signs of violence. No IDs. No eyes. Just one phrase tattooed in blood on the back of one of them. She crossed over again. The third survivor, a woman, was found in a catatonic state inside a Boston psychiatric hospital. Since then, she hasn't spoken a single word. She only draws, compulsively, spirals with backward hands. The team was officially declared missing. The government denied involvement. And once again, Thornhill was sealed. But something had changed. The air around the building felt denser. Animals avoided the area. Locals began to report recurring nightmares of a woman walking backward through endless corridors. Whatever had been contained was no longer asleep. Alternative researchers who studied the Project Return archives noted a clear pattern. Every time someone tries to document the reverse lady, She responds not with presence, but with absence. She erases. She silences. She removes. As if every attempt to capture her only makes her more aware, more alive. As if she's learning to be remembered. What remains now are fragments. Incomplete records. Echoes of something that never should have been called. But experts warn, nothing truly disappears. And the name Thornhill, still whispered in locked rooms, in hidden forums, in torn notes found behind mirrors, continues to return. She was the beginning. She was the middle. She still is the end. But the end hasn't come yet, because the last whisper has not been heard. If you've read this far, maybe you've been seen too. But don't worry. Just don't look into the mirror tonight. And if it calls your name, don't answer.